Okay, so this is a tutorial for making a Doberman dog. I found this image on Pinterest, so I can't really remember who drew it, but I'll give them credits if this ever becomes anything more than just uh, a tutorial for students. Um, so what I'm trying to do with this tutorial is just try and bridge the barrier between modeling in a 3D space as organically as possible, using just 2D images really. So I've already started. This clip is sped up to about 400%. This took me about 2 hours and 20 minutes to do. I've sped up to about half an hour, I think, 35 minutes. So I started with a cube, and I have just started moving the vertices in the front and side views to try and match the shape of the head. I'm only really working with really broad strokes at the minute because you have to sort of work with what you can when you don't have the edge loops in. So as I started doing that, I then used the multi-cut tool to start to add in the 3 other cuts along the centres, which allowed me to start moving these vertices around. So I'm just sort of going for the main body of the head. Added another cut in just for the brow and just underneath the eye as well. So from this point I took the faces from the front just below the nose and I extended it with an extrude. It's really important as you go along just to keep moving the vertices around just to make sure that you've got the roughest shape possible, because when it comes to later on and you've got hundreds of vertices, when you use the multi-cut tool, you really, if you haven't done the legwork first in making sure everything's smooth, then it will really mess up for you. So it's best to picket it all the time. So I'm just trying to get the shape of the muzzle right now and the end of the nose. Just trying to go really broad strokes. Not really worrying too much about topology at the minute. So from this point I've got symmetry on and I've used the multi-cut tool to break apart the nose. I'll worry about the topology in a minute. I extruded that out just to add an extra line of faces in there, which made the first ring around the nose. So I've got to sort that triangle out now, so I've simply just multi-cut tooled straight through the middle to make it a quad rather than a triangle. So I've added that edge loop in because then it'll be a sharper perimeter around the nose. So I can't stress how important it is just to niggle all the time when you're working. So this edge here will eventually be the cut in the middle of the mouth. So as you can see, I'm messing around with it there. I didn't actually do it in the end, but I put an edge loop in vertically so that I could find the edge of the mouth, and then I added a cut in the centre. I've detached it using the detach tool, and I've used faces to bring down the lower jaw so it separates those edges, therefore you have your cut. I've removed the neck because you don't need those anymore, those faces. So what I'm doing here is I'm adding in multi-cuts, and I've literally cut straight into the face there and made all quads, so it's made the first loop. I'd pause the video if you want to see how that looks. So it's really important when you have a mouth to make those 3 edge loops go in like that. They really help deformation when it comes to rigging later. Another point, it's quite important before you start modelling your thing, whatever it is, could be a dog, could be a person, could be an armchair. It's really important to do your research on how they really look in real life. The more anatomical knowledge you have, the easier you'll find it to model, because you'll know how shapes go. Eventually, when you get into it, you'll notice that the edge loops flow with things like muscle. So when you have bulging, it will flow along the bulge, along the muscle. In this case, it was the jaw. So from here, I'm making ears. I decided in the end to remove those two cuts and just join them together. And I'll sort that topology out later, because that's an engon. I've extruded the ears up, and I start extruding again just to get the height on them, and then start moving the vertices to get the right width. You see, it's very easy to get carried away and just try and do all the detail now, but it is so important just to do broad strokes until you're ready to add the detail. It's something I often struggle with, and I think I go ahead and do most of the ears now, which isn't too bad. But if you're doing things like eyes, it can get very complicated very quickly, and it can really slow you down. So I mainly use the multi-cut tool. So when it comes to using this tool, you can use Control, and it will give you all of the functionality of the edge loop tool and more. And you can just left mouse button click on any face, and it will start inserting loop points of vertices. Also, if you're holding Control and you want to insert an edge loop directly in the middle of a face, you can just press the middle mouse button and it will insert it directly 50% between in the face. So I just made some loops with sort of roughly where the edge of the ear is, and I've just extruded in twice. I'm just clearing up the topology there to make it much less cramped, especially near the top. I spent quite a long time finessing this, but you don't have to finesse straight away. You can go ahead and it's more important to do the broad strokes. So right here I'm looping the ears back into themselves. So it removes topology from, say for example, the face area. Later in the tutorial I'll come back and change that, and I use some of it in the eye instead, because that's when I needed it. I often find that if your model's starting to get quite messy, with lots of lots of vertices in front and behind on things, it sometimes helps if you take an entire edge loop, and if it's possible to do so, you can flatten it using a scale tool, and it starts to tidy things up again. You can do it horizontally and vertically. It sometimes doesn't work, and if it needs to be at a certain angle, then there's no point doing it. But you might find it's a useful fix sometimes. So it's quite cramped in the ears now, but it's okay. It's fine, and that makes quite a nice little point at the top of the ear. So I'm continuously just niggling with this and trying to spread out the vertices to make them more even. You generally want to finesse it so each point is 50% between the ones around it. You can also use things like the surface tools, like the geometry tools, to relax things, or you can use average in the menus. But I tend to just do it by eye, and especially with organic shapes, it's a lot easier. It's not so. It looks more natural if it's not perfectly even. Although you do have to be careful because you don't want things like corners in natural shapes, unless it calls for a corner. This, quite luckily, is a cartoon dog, so it really doesn't matter that much. So it's always really important to go back to your orthographs, because as you can see, I have completely gone outside of the lines, and I've moved things around quite a bit. If you don't watch it every now and again, you can seriously cause yourself some problems later if you've added in too much topology. So I'm now using a sphere for the eye, and I'm using the orthograph just to sort of line it up. So the way I did this without typing anything in is if you use E to go to the rotate tool, and then you hold down J, you can rotate in increments of 15. So now that I have the eye at the right size and in the right place, I can now see how the head needs to change in the 3D space in order to fit the eye in the skull. So I've added it to a layer just to make it on a reference. Very much like the same with the orthograph, so I can't select it. So I added in some extra geometry just to buff it out a little bit. So I'm using the multi-cut tool again. If you double click the settings for it, you can tick the box which says edge flow, and it will smooth the geometry for you when you place it. Very much like how the multi-cut tool does. So now I'm just moving vertices. You can use the middle point within the translate tool to do that better, and along sort of parallel with the camera that you're using. I've used the multi-cut tool again just to go and make a loop. So think how a raccoon has the colour around its eyes, or possibly the Incredibles, how they have their little mask. That's how you want to get the edge loops flowing. So if I've ever had a triangle in there, I've either merged the 2 points, or I have drawn new geometry up into the eye socket. So I'm not worrying too much about the orthograph right now, I'm just sort of worrying about the topology first. Then once that's done, I'll be able to finesse it a little bit more. He's quite an angry looking dog. He's got a squint on. So we had a triangle there, so I've just removed that, and I've started using the looped edges from the ears to place it into the top of the eye instead. So because I've been niggling, and I have placed all the vertices in the right place already, so it's all smooth, it will, when I add an edge loop in, it will smooth the way I want it to. sometimes it doesn't work, and especially if you're adding things in with edge float on, and you're adding things into the actual faces, like creating loops, it will mess up. So it does have its drawbacks, but it's pretty good. So I've turned on smooth soft select using B, and I've started moving the corners of the eyes into places which match up with the orthographs. So the eyes actually come quite far around the side of the head. I'm just moving the brow around now. I'm creating space, sort of making everything 50% between everything. And so it's really important to try and fill out cheeks, because they can look quite gormless if you don't. Or like Granny when she hasn't got her teeth in. I know these are eyes, but it's the same concept. So I had some engons there, which are 5 pointed faces. So I had to add in some extra edge loops to correct that into quads. So I'm just shaping this loop now, and I'm making sure that the points of the eyes are in the right place. It's really important that those 3 points are quite close together for deformation when it comes to blinking. So I was trying to mess around and turn these edge loops into, I was trying to circularize them, but it didn't work in the end, so eventually I just halved the model and did it manually. So you can turn symmetry off by holding Control, Shift and right click and going to symmetry. It's a little shortcut there. So as I was telling you earlier, how when it gets messy you can flatten it, that was a perfect example of it. So when I extrude this now, it'll be flat. I'm just tidying up the edge loops on the inside of the eye, and then I go and do it again. Yeah, it's really important to get those corners perfect before you move on. If you niggle now, you won't have to niggle later when it's really dense topology. So I'm just trying to make, I'm bringing those eyes in just a little bit, the corners, because you can see a little bit behind the eyeball. It's not really something I want. So I use the soft select to bring those into the eyeball so that it clips, so you won't be able to see behind it. It's important to bring the cheeks out because they will look gaunt. See, the neck of this dog is quite straight. It's quite a strong, intimidating animal. So it's good to try and emulate that. Is one of the points of finessing at the end. So I added another loop there. So I've merged those 2 points. So once again, moving the topology around to get it roughly 50% between the next 2 points. So I then took the slide edge tool. I started moving all these loops out to space them. So I'm just looking around now just to figure out where I'm going with it next. Try and work out what the next step should be. So I decided to do the mouth next. I think I popped back to this a few times, but it's the same process as with the eyes. You need to sort out the corners and move all the geometry around to make sure that it deforms properly. It doesn't clip. So I decided to bevel the lip there. Didn't really work to the way I wanted to, but it was enough just to add in a loop. I slid the edge along just to give it a bit of space, and then I moved back into the mouth to move the points around. So I added an extra loop in there because I wanted the muzzle to be a little bit more defined at this point. It's important to note that the top lip will always go over the bottom lip when it comes to the corners. The muscle in your face, if you try and smile, you can feel it. It goes down from your nose and over your lip. So I had a moment there where the geometry had gotten confused and I had to realign some of it. It was all a bit too close for the machine to really pick up on though, so I had to halve the model and do it manually. So I'm starting to fill out the muzzle of the dog and align the lips properly. You can do it with symmetry on, or you can do it half a model and then just mirror it. It's all up to you. It just depends what you find easiest to do, really. So it's important to have, again, like the eyelids, have a loop running around the mouth. Also helps to separate the nose. However, on a dog, it's not So there's the end of the dog. I hope this was useful. I didn't model the teeth or the tongue, so I'll come back to that later. Also need some more detail in the eyes, but that can be done another time. Next video will be the body of the dog and the collar. So I hope this was helpful in organic modelling. I know I jump all over the place a little bit, but I'm afraid you just got to find your own way.